Most people spend 30 years being told that owning a home is the smartest financial move they can make. Then they retire, and somewhere around year 2 they realize the paid-off house is still billing them $18,000 a year in property taxes, insurance, and maintenance. The mortgage is gone, the expenses are not. Here is what the math actually looks like. The financial industry has a term for what most retirees experience. It is called being asset-rich and cash flow poor. You have built something on paper that looks impressive, but paper does not pay your electric bill in February. Let me show you how this plays out with a real number. The median home value in the United States right now sits around $420,000. If you own that home outright in retirement, congratulations! You have $420,000 locked inside 4 walls that generates zero income unless you sell it, borrow against it, or die and let someone else deal with it. Meanwhile, $420,000 invested in a conservative index fund at 7% annual returns generates roughly $29,400 per year. That is $2,450 every single month deposited into your account, whether you're sleeping, traveling, or sitting on the porch watching the neighbors wonder what you're doing with your time. The house generates nothing. The portfolio generates income. That is not an opinion. That is arithmetic. Now here's where the psychology breaks down. People hear that comparison and immediately say the house also appreciates. True, the national average for home appreciation runs about 4% per year historically. On a $420,000 home, that's $16,800 in paper gains annually. Meanwhile, your index fund is generating 7%, which is $29,400. The math favors the liquid asset by $12,600 per year, every year, compounding. And you cannot spend home appreciation without selling the house or borrowing against it, both of which come with costs and complications. You can spend portfolio income every single month. Let me give you a concrete example. Meet a guy named Gary. Gary is 65. He spent 28 years paying off a house that is now worth $480,000. He has $95,000 in his 401k. On paper, Gary looks like he's done well, but using the 4% withdrawal rule on his retirement account, Gary is pulling about $3,800 per year from his investments. Add Social Security at roughly $22,000 annually, and Gary is living on about $26,000 a year. His property taxes alone run $7,200 a year. His homeowner's insurance is $2,400. Last winter, his furnace died. That was $6,800. Gary is not retired. Gary is a part-time property manager who happens to live on the premises and does not get paid. His net worth looks fine. His cash flow is a slow-motion crisis. Now meet a guy named Phil. Phil rented the same size home in the same zip code as Gary for $1,800 a month. Instead of pouring his working years into a mortgage, Phil invested $700 a month for 28 years into a straightforward S&P 500 index fund. At 7% returns, Phil enters retirement with approximately $710,000 in liquid investable assets. Using the 4% rule, Phil pulls $28,400 per year from his portfolio. Add Social Security, and Phil is sitting at roughly $50,000 in annual retirement income. When the furnace breaks in his rental unit, he calls the landlord. Phil's cash flow is not a crisis. Phil has options. Here is the argument homeowners make at this point in the conversation. They say rent can go up. They are right, but so does everything else. Property taxes in major metro areas have been rising faster than inflation for a decade straight. In many parts of Florida and Texas, retirees are being priced out of their paid-off homes purely because the tax bill doubled in 6 years. The mortgage disappears. The recurring costs do not. Ownership does not mean fixed costs. It means costs with no ceiling and no one else responsible for the roof. There is also a liquidity argument that most financial conversations skip entirely. Liquidity is what keeps you from making desperate decisions. When you have accessible capital, you can absorb unexpected medical bills without panic. You can help a family member without a second thought. You can take advantage of an opportunity without selling an illiquid asset at the wrong time. Home equity is the opposite of liquidity. It is wealth you cannot access without a transaction. A reverse mortgage sounds like a solution until you read the actual terms and realize the bank understands compound interest better than most borrowers do. A home equity line of credit is borrowing money against an asset you thought you owned outright. Neither of these is cash flow. Both of them are leverage in retirement, which is not a position most financial advisors would recommend. The flexibility argument matters more than people admit, and it accelerates with age. At 70, your healthcare needs are not the same as at 60. At 75, proximity to medical care may not be optional. At 80, single-story living may not be a preference, but a requirement. If you own a home, responding to any of these realities means selling, which involves repairs, staging, inspections, agent commissions running 5 to 6%, closing costs, timing the market, and finding somewhere else to live simultaneously. If you rent, you give notice and move. The friction cost of owning in retirement is not just financial, it's logistical and emotional at exactly the stage of life when managing complexity becomes harder. Here is a framework for thinking through this decision with actual numbers rather than sentiment. There are 4 variables that determine whether renting or owning makes more financial sense in retirement. Number 1 is the price-to-rent ratio in your market. Divide the purchase price of a comparable home by the annual rent for that same home. If the ratio is above 20, renting is almost always the financially superior choice. In San Francisco right now, that ratio is around 40. In Austin, it's around 25. These markets are mathematically penalizing buyers and subsidizing renters relative to the capital required. Number 2 is your actual liquid net worth versus total net worth. If more than 50% of your net worth is tied up in your home, your retirement income is structurally compromised, regardless of what the house is worth. The number on paper does not pay for groceries. Number 3 is your withdrawal horizon. The 4% rule assumes a 30-year retirement. If you retire at 62 and live to 92, that's a 30-year horizon. Every dollar trapped in home equity is a dollar that is not compounding in your portfolio for that 30 years. The opportunity cost of equity at 62 is significant. Number 4 is your maintenance exposure. Homes over 15 years old generate average annual maintenance costs of 1 to 2% of the home's value. On a $420,000 home, that is $4,200 to $8,400 per year in repairs that do not show up on any mortgage statement and cannot be predicted or planned around with precision. The identity argument is the one that actually drives most of the resistance to this conversation. People attach their sense of financial success to ownership. The paid-off house feels like proof of something. It is a tangible object that represents decades of work. That feeling is real, but feelings do not generate retirement income. What generates retirement income is liquid, compounding capital deployed consistently over time. A $700,000 portfolio does not look like much hanging on a wall, but it generates $28,000 per year in passive income indefinitely, adjusts for inflation, and remains accessible when your circumstances change. The house is a symbol. The portfolio is a machine. None of this means renting is always the answer. If you own a home in a low-cost area with minimal maintenance burden, have strong liquidity elsewhere, and your housing cost is genuinely below what renting would cost, the math can favor staying. But that specific scenario is not what most retirees are actually living. Most retirees are Gary. Large equity, thin cash flow, one unexpected expense away from a genuinely difficult month. The question is not whether owning a home is a good thing. The question is whether keeping that capital locked in an illiquid asset during the 20 to 30 years when your income is fixed and your expenses are unpredictable is the optimal allocation. For most people, when they actually run the numbers rather than go with the cultural narrative, it is not. The paid-off house is not a retirement plan. It is a retirement anchor dressed up as a finish line.